You're listening to Systemic Era Podcast. The failure was designed.
Behind closed doors, expert predictions on what Trump will do next in escalating war, based on an article by Robert Rye. Trump's Iran war is a test of how much ruin the system will tolerate. This is not confusion. The source is useful because it names the thing plainly. Trump's war with Iran never really stopped, and the escalation is back in motion. More American warplanes are heading to the Middle East. American service members are dead after an Iranian missile attack in Jordan. The Strait of Hormuz is closed again. Oil is climbing. That is the context. What matters is not the noise around it. What matters is who has the power to keep expanding the damage, who enabled that power, and who will be asked to absorb the consequences. Power sits with the elected executive. Trump holds the institutional authority to widen or halt this war. He decides whether the U.S. keeps bombing, whether it targets water infrastructure, whether it gambles on a ground invasion, or whether it tries to sell retreat as triumph. The article's menu of options is built around that fact, even when it softens into speculation. That is the core political reality. This is not an uncontrollable clash of states. It is a chain of decisions. Trump launched the war, Trump escalated it, and Trump is now threatening to completely decimate and destroy Iran if assassination threats against him are carried out. That is not diplomacy. It is imperial blackmail wrapped in personal grievance. The civilian cost is the point of leverage. The article notes that Iran could be pushed toward attacks on water infrastructure, that this would create humanitarian catastrophe, refugee flows, and likely retaliation against Gulf states. That is the logic of coercive war in plain view. Pressure civilians until leaders move. The framing should not be treated as abstract strategy. If the target set includes dams, desalination plants, and transportation infrastructure, then the object is not merely military advantage. It is the deliberate conversion of ordinary life into bargaining pressure. That is why euphemisms about making life impossible matter. They hide the fact that the policy is built around mass suffering. The limits are real, but they are not restrained. The source stresses that the U.S. lacks the munitions to sustain the bombing campaign indefinitely, that replacing the weapons already used could take years, and that oil over $90 a barrel raises the domestic cost. Those are real constraints. They are also the wrong kind of constraint to celebrate. This is not a story about enlightened caution. It is a story about logistics, depletion, and political survival. Trump is not being slowed by moral seriousness. He is being checked by stockpile exhaustion, oil prices, and midterm arithmetic. That means the war is being governed by scarcity and polling, not principle. That is a dangerous way to run a foreign policy and an even worse way to run a democracy. The advisors are not background noise. The source points to advisors like Pete Hegseth as voices pushing more belligerence. That matters. Wars do not escalate on rhetoric alone. They escalate through people who make cruelty sound like strength and disaster sound like resolve. But the bigger point is institutional. The war is not only Trump's psychology, it is also the national security machinery that keeps offering him variations on the same failed premise. Bomb harder, pressure more, force a concession, then declare success. That is not strategy. It is repetition with higher body counts. Declare victory and go home is the most honest lie. The article's final scenario, in which Trump could simply declare victory and walk away, is the most revealing because it shows how much of this war is performative. Trump may not need a real settlement if he can sell the appearance of one. He may not need durable control of the Strait of Hormuz if he can claim he fixed the problem and count on enough Americans to believe him. That is the corrosion at the center of the story. The war can continue because the political system is structurally prepared to confuse performance for policy. Trump can bomb, threaten, retreat, and relabel the outcome. The state, the press, and too many political actors will then debate whether the optics were good enough instead of asking why a president was allowed to launch and prolong a war with no coherent end state. The pattern is authoritarian war by narrative. This story is not about one reckless man drifting through a crisis. It is about a governing style that turns violence into branding and treats public misunderstanding as a resource. Trump escalates. Advisors rationalize. Military capacity gets consumed. Civilians in Iran and the region pay the price. Americans are told to watch the price of oil and the midterms while the machinery of war keeps grinding. That is the larger pattern. Executive power used as spectacle, war sold as strength, and accountability delayed until the damage is already distributed. The article shows the shape of it clearly enough. The democratic failure is letting a president convert a regional war into a personal property dispute, and then asking the public to judge his messaging instead of the wreckage. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Alternet for today's article, with the automated voice of Clara. Thanks for listening.